Welcome to this explainer. You know, when most of us think of a county jail, we probably picture a simple holding cell, right? Just a temporary stopover. But the reality of a modern local detention facility is way more complex than that. Today, we are going to map out the entire carceral ecosystem of the Shasta County Jail. We're going to dive into how it actually operates, who is really running it, and all the hidden mechanics of this high-security, multi-million-dollar city within a city.
So what does it actually take to run a city where literally no one wants to live? It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? But seriously, think of this place as a fully functioning municipal infrastructure. It requires its own dedicated healthcare system, its own specialized telecommunications network, a completely localized economy, and its own dedicated security force. Every single day, the administration is constantly balancing state mandates with constitutional rights, all while rubbing right up against extreme physical capacity limits.
To really put the sheer scale of this operational challenge into perspective, just think about this staggering figure, 98.7%. That is the percentage of the population inside this facility facing felony charges. So this isn't just a place for minor, low-level offenses anymore. Not at all. It is a highly complex, prison-like environment driven by shifting state demographics. Managing a population like that is an incredibly high-liability endeavor, requiring intense operational discipline and massive financial resources. Okay, so here's our roadmap for dismantling and examining this place piece by piece. First, the modern jail ecosystem. Second, the privatized carceral economy. Third, the frontline custodial challenge. Fourth, the mental health crisis. And finally, number 5, re-entry and the future.
Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the modern jail ecosystem, navigating AP 109 and state mandates.
To truly grasp why the jail operates the way it does today, we got to rewind a bit and look at how macro policy in California fundamentally altered local detention. Back in 2011, the state enacted the Public Safety Realignment Act, which is widely known as AB 109. And this was just a massive legislative shift. It essentially transferred the custodial burden of non-serious, non-violent, and non-sexual offenders directly from state prisons down to county jails. Now, for a 484-bed facility like the Shasta County Jail, this mandate created chronic, long-term physical overcrowding. It effectively transformed what was designed to be a short-term local detention center into a long-term holding and rehabilitation facility. It completely shifted the demographic and the risk profile of the inmates inside overnight.
Which brings us to Section 2, the privatized carceral economy, outsourcing the burden.
Because local municipalities simply don't have the internal capabilities, or frankly the risk tolerance, to manage all the complex needs of this realigned population, they have to rely on an extensive network of specialized private vendors. Let's break down how this outsourcing actually functions. You've got Medico handling all the clinical and psychiatric care. Then, telecommunications are managed by IC Solutions and ViaPath, providing the phones, tablets, and video visits. The commissary is entirely run by the Keefe network, while alternative custody solutions like behavioral therapy and GPS tracking are contracted right out to Geo Reentry. These aren't just your standard service providers, they form a highly interdependent multi-million-dollar architecture that essentially runs the daily operations of this captive economy.
Within this ecosystem, the internal retail economy is strictly regulated and entirely cashless. The whole operation is managed by that Keefe commissary network. When an arrestee is booked, any physical cash they have is confiscated, receipted, and immediately deposited into a digital inmate trust account. Notice, too, there's a very strict $100 maximum weekly spending limit per inmate. This is designed to maintain economic equity and prevent hoarding behind bars. By completely eliminating physical cash and moving away from physical mail deposits, the facility significantly cuts down on dangerous contraband, especially the growing trend of liquid narcotics being soaked into paper correspondence. But as you can imagine, running this automated third-party system requires intense, internal municipal accounting oversight to prevent errors and ensure every single cent is tracked properly. Now, this reliance on private tech vendors becomes absolutely critical when physical infrastructure fails. In late 2025, a massive elevator modernization project basically paralyzed the jail, making civilian movement within the facility impossible. This forced the total suspension of all in-person visitation. However, the tech vendor ViaPath stepped in and provided 60 minutes of free digital video visitation per week to all inmates via their tablets. This is a perfect example of how deeply integrated these technological contractors are when it comes to maintaining statutory and constitutional obligations around inmate communication, especially when physical limitations pop up.
Moving on to Section 3, the Frontline Custodial Challenge, Training for the Impossible.
Now, what's really interesting here is the human element.
The minimum educational requirement to be a correctional officer at this facility is just a high school diploma or a GED. But the psychological reality? It is incredibly stark. During the application process, candidates actually have to legally acknowledge something called the no hostage doctrine. This formally states that if an officer is taken hostage by the inmate population, the county absolutely will not bargain, negotiate, or trade for their safe release. It establishes a firm, potentially lethal baseline that candidates have to accept before an offer of employment is ever even extended.
Once staff are inside the facility, liability is actively managed and heavily compartmentalized through strict legal boundaries between the sworn staff and the private medical contractors. Simply put, guards handle the security and private contractors handle the medicine. The lines absolutely do not cross. Custodial staff are explicitly prohibited from determining or prescribing any medical treatment. Their duties are limited to security, executing housing assignments, conducting mandatory 15-minute safety checks for vulnerable inmates, and handling emergency transports. Meanwhile, the medical contractors hold exclusive authority over all clinical diagnoses, medication prescriptions, and generating those individualized treatment plans.
So how do they prepare deputies to operate independently in an environment plagued by sophisticated gang dynamics and accidental fentanyl overdoses? Well, new deputies are thrown into a compressed 120-day training crash course. They have to pass PC 832 arrest and firearms training, the state-mandated Adult Corrections Officer Core course, and specifically 21 hours of intensive behavioral health training to learn crises de-escalation. It's a real pedagogical gauntlet, and if they fail to meet these statutory benchmarks within that strict deadline, they simply cannot exercise peace officer powers.
Section 4. The Mental Health Crisis. Triage behind bars.
Because the jail has functionally become the largest mental health facility in the county, intake is incredibly strict. The moment an individual is booked, a comprehensive receiving screening has to be performed to detect immediate psychiatric risk, developmental disabilities, and communicable diseases. The strict guidelines they follow brilliantly illustrate the intricate state-mandated screening policies the county uses. It is a critical clinical triage mechanism designed to identify high-risk individuals before they ever enter the general population.
But you know what happens when that system fails? The county previously contracted with a low-bid provider named WellPath. And according to official reports, budgetary optimization and understaffing led to some truly catastrophic clinical outcomes. This actually culminated in a record $12.75 million wrongful death settlement following the suicide of an inmate who was improperly triaged. The grand jury also released findings heavily criticizing the vendor for mismanaging infectious diseases like MRSA, noting that inconsistent protocols put both inmates and staff at serious risk.
In direct response to those compounding legal and ethical liabilities, the Board of Supervisors had to take action. They unanimously approved a new 3-year, $25 million contract with Medico Correctional Healthcare effective July 2026. Now, this represents a 40% absolute cost increase over the previous provider. It is essentially an incredibly expensive municipal insurance policy, explicitly designed to double the medical and mental health staffing at the facility, shielding the county from further Eighth Amendment litigation and aggressively elevating the standard of care.
But what happens if an inmate simply refuses treatment? The facility constantly has to balance constitutional rights with overall safety. When treating inmates with severe mental illness who are a danger to themselves or others, the facility utilizes this incredibly dense legal pathway called the Kihea process to involuntarily medicate them. The process breaks down like this. Physicians can order emergency medication for up to 72 hours. To continue beyond that window, they must file for a formal hearing before an administrative law judge within 21 days. If that judge finds clear and convincing evidence of necessity, they can grant a long-term authorization for up to 180 days.
Let's move to our final section and see how this all builds together. Section 5. Re-entry and the future. Breaking the cycle.
With the facility basically bursting at the seams, the county really has to deploy technological exit strategies to alleviate physical overcrowding, and the sheer economic logic of this shift is undeniable. Housing an inmate inside the physical confines of the jail costs approximately $109 per day. By contrast, contracting with BI Incorporated to place an offender on an ankle monitor with GPS tracking costs only about $26 a day. By heavily utilizing geo-reentry services and electronic monitoring for nonviolent offenders, county officials estimate they have generated upwards of $25 million in custodial savings, all while freeing up vital physical beds for high-risk individuals. But physical tracking just isn't enough on its own. Clinical continuity is absolutely critical. Historically, when a mentally ill inmate was discharged, they faced a very dangerous lapse in psychiatric care.
Now, the Cal AIM Justice-involved reentry initiative is creating what they call a warm handoff. This is a forward-looking paradigm shift that legally extends healthcare responsibilities beyond the jail walls. Eligible inmates can actually be enrolled in Medi-Cal up to 90 days prior to their release. This allows staff to build a customized care plan so they are discharged with a supply of psychiatric medications and scheduled community appointments. It is a major, major step in preventing fatal overdoses and stopping that cyclical recidivism.
The 2024-2025 Shasta County Grand Jury perfectly summarized the facility's shifting reality, noting how the high concentration of felons has created a harsher prison-type environment, one that deeply exacerbates the psychiatric distress of vulnerable inmates. And this really matters to all of us, because a jail is no longer just a place to lock people away. It is a highly monetized public-private partnership dealing directly with the hardest edges of the public health crisis. The operational health of this massive ecosystem directly impacts our overall community well-being.
So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to consider. As county jails increasingly become our primary behavioral health centers, managing complex medical care, balancing private tech contracts, and dealing with profound psychiatric crises, who is really serving the sentence? Is it the inmates, the frontline staff, or the community at large? It's a wildly complex intersection of criminal justice and public health. I really hope this explainer helped you understand the massive gears turning behind the walls. Thanks so much for joining me.